Cook County Sheriff's Office is one step closer to searching a Northwest Side apartment building where serial killer John Wayne Gacy may have buried bodies or other evidence, a sheriff's spokesman said today. The Cook County State's Attorney's Office gave its approval late Friday to the Sheriff's Office's request to obtain a search warrant for the apartment building in the 6100 block of West Miami Avenue, where Gacy's mother once lived and Gacy once worked as a maintenance employee, Sheriff spokesman Frank Bilecki said. Speculation about this property has been out there for many years, Bilecki said. This whole Gacy case has taken so many different twists and turns, so being able to close a chapter of it at this property would be nice. The site was previously investigated after a retired Chicago police homicide detective tipped authorities to the fact that he had seen Gacy in the yard with a shovel in his hand at 3 a.m. one morning in the 1970s. That dig, in November 1998, turned up a glass marble and a flattened saucepan, but no bodies, according to Tribune accounts of the Chicago police excavation. Sheriff Tom Dart returned to the Gacy case in 2011 when he exhumed the skeletons of several unidentified victims in the hopes DNA could help identify them. The inquiry led to the identification of one victim, William George Bundy, a Chicagoan who disappeared at age 17. At the time, Dart said detectives assigned to the Gacy investigation were considering a number of other investigative avenues. Last March, the state's attorney's office denied a request from the sheriff's office to reinvestigate the Miami Avenue site, saying the sheriff's office did not have probable cause to obtain a warrant. Sheriff's investigators have gathered more evidence since then, which led to approval from the state's attorney's office on Friday, Bilecki said. Still, any work at the site is likely weeks or even months away, Bilecki said. A judge still must sign off on the warrant, and the sheriff's office will have to enlist the help of the FBI and private companies to search the property, he said. The work will be relatively non-invasive, Bilecki said. Investigators will use devices that scan the ground for anomalies, he said. If any are found, a small hole will be drilled in the ground at that spot, and cadaver dogs will then sniff that spot, he said. We're not going in with backhoes and the whole 9 yards, Bilecki said. We don't expect to be there more than a day. Gacy was convicted of the murders of 33 young men and boys in the 1970s, all but one of them strangled, many of them recovered in his crawl space. He was executed by lethal injection at Stateville Correctional Center, near Joliet, in 1994. What brought sheriff's officials back to the property was that, during the 1998 dig, only 2 spots were excavated even though radar surveys of the property reportedly detected more than a dozen anomalies under the ground. That raised the suspicions of the retired detective who initially tipped police to the Gacy connection, Bill Dorsch. He provided the Tribune a letter from the radar company saying the initial dig was incomplete. In a proper investigation, the letter said, the authorities would have been more willing to excavate any possibility. Dorsch, who retired in 1994 from the Chicago Police Department after 24 years, recalled that one day at 3 a.m., as he came home from work, he saw Gacy with a shovel and they chatted briefly. After Gacy's arrest, he called sheriff's officials with the information about him, assuming officials would investigate the tip and potentially excavate. That apparently did not happen until the 1998 excavation.
Life's so cold.
He was known as the Killer Clown. John Wayne Gacy murdered 33 young men and was executed in 1993. But we're learning the Gacy story may not be over. New details of the investigation have only recently come to light and may show Gacy didn't act alone. 33 years after his arrest, there are still lingering questions about John Wayne Gacy. Terry Sullivan was on the prosecution team.
I felt that from the beginning that there may be loose ends. It was such a huge case, and especially at the time.
The idea of a Gacy accomplice was raised from the beginning by Jeffrey Rignall. He is one of a few people who survived Gacy's attack. He said another man was at Gacy's home the night Gacy raped him. Attorneys Robert Stevenson and Steve Becker have been trying to help families of victims find answers. They've been getting tips from the public, and they've uncovered information that they say shows someone else may have been involved in some of the killings.
There is significant evidence out there that suggests that not only did John Wayne Gacy not operate alone, may not have been involved in some of the murders, and the fact that he was largely a copycat killer.
For this story, we're focusing on two of Gacy's victims, Russell Nelson and Robert Gilroy. September 15th, 1977. Gilroy sends a letter to his girlfriend from a mailbox not far from Gacy's home. Then at 6 p.m. that same day, Gilroy is supposed to meet other kids at a bus stop for a trip to equestrian school, but he never shows up. He was never seen again. But according to Gacy's receipts in court records, Gacy's plane ticket shows he flew to Pennsylvania September 12th and didn't return until the night of the 16th, the day after Gilroy was last seen alive. Could someone have been helping Gacy? Listen to this recording of a phone conversation between Gacy in prison and a friend in Chicago.
Well, I wasn't even in Illinois when 16 of these so-called individuals disappeared.
A month later, October 1977, Russell Nelson disappears. According to testimony from his mother, Russell went to a disco on North Broadway with a friend who was several years older. The friend called the family to say Nelson just disappeared outside the disco, and that he would look for him if they'd send money. He called me 2 or 3 times a week and threatened me for money. He said he was staying down here to look for my son. Russell Nelson's brothers went to Chicago to look for Russell and met with the friend who was asking their mother to send money to help search for Russell. The friend offered Russell's brothers a job with John Wayne Gacy. Russell Nelson's sister-in-law recently told us the family is anxious for answers.
I would like to have if anybody else is involved in it, they're brought to justice for what they have done to him. Or it could have been somebody else out there.
And another possible connection to Gacy. It turns out a few months before Russell Nelson disappeared, Gacy did work at a drugstore just blocks from where the friend lived.
I think it tells us that John Wayne Gacy was using other individuals to procure young boys over state lines.
According to Becker and Stevenson, the friend is still alive and now living in another state.
If in fact Gacy had other accomplices or people who knew something that was going on, those people should be brought to justice. It's scary in and of itself that there may be others out there.
There's something else mysterious about the cases of Robert Gilroy and Russell Nelson. While Gacy was known to use a rope and board to strangle his victims, the autopsy reports for Gilroy and Nelson show they died from asphyxiation from suffocation, not strangulation. The report says that each had cloth in their mouths.
They claim that I strangled each and every one of them. Look at your strangulation. Put a rope around their neck and strangle them after they were handcuffed. If that's so, then how come the autopsy reports don't match that? Which tells you there had to be more than one person.
In fact, 13 victims were listed as suffocation. Another serial killer case may offer insight to Gacy's mode of operation. In Terry Sullivan's book, Killer Clown, a detective asks Gacy where he got the idea for the torture board. Gacy replies, from Elmer Wayne Henley. Henley and another boy helped serial killer Dean Corll, whose case has a lot of similarities with Gacy. Corll abducted, raped, tortured, and murdered 28 boys, mostly teenagers, in the early 1970s in Houston. He often used handcuffs and strangled his victims.
They do follow Corll's mode of operation almost identically, and one of the most significant parts about Corll is that he used 2 much younger individuals to assist him in gathering up and luring in his victims.
Nothing as far as killing or recruiting or bringing, we had no evidence of that. We thought about it, but we just never saw any evidence.
Gacy's defense lawyer, Sam Amarante, says he doesn't believe any of it. He says Gacy confessed to everything early on, and after years in prison, began to change his story.
I used to talk to Gacy about maybe somebody else committed the offense. Maybe Gacy was in some sort of stupor or drug state or alcohol state and didn't know what was going on around him. And we sort of would plant a seed in John's brain as to what happened. He would look at us and say, maybe you're right. Maybe that's really what happened.
Becker and Stevenson will be taking their case to law enforcement.
These individuals did end up in Gacy's crawl space. So we're just looking to find out the whole truth about these cases, and we followed these leads to this point.
If these individuals were working with John Wayne Gacy to procure young boys, they should be held to justice.
The scope of the Gacy case is as complex as it is disturbing. And after 3 decades, there are still questions that haunt investigators, as well as the families of victims still looking for answers. Becker and Stevenson say they will be meeting with Sheriff Dart today to discuss their findings. Sheriff Dart says he continues to gather information and follow up on leads pertaining to the Gacy case.
Let's throw it to Jim Ramsey now for a look at the weather. Hey, Jim.
Hi there. We've got the Friday forecaster with us today. This is Adria Henley.
You're 81st in Ashland. Bowling was convicted of aggravated DUI, reckless homicide, and leaving the scene of an accident. Bowling could get 15 years in prison.
We recently told you about 2 lawyers investigating possible accomplices to serial killer John Wayne Gacy. After our story last week, more tips have been coming in, including information about a man in Gacy's inner circle. At the time of the Gacy case, investigators were suspicious that he knew more than what he was telling. Now new information has them taking a second look. John Mowry was a 19-year-old Marine when he disappeared in September of 1977. His friends tell WGN that one of John Wayne Gacy's construction workers moved in with Mowry 4 days before Mowry disappeared. Mowry's friends kept returning to his apartment hoping to find him.
We contacted him trying to find out where John was at, and he'd be upset. He was glad that John was gone. He seemed like he had a little bit of a temper. He would get mad easily. Very odd. We were afraid of him.
One day, the friends say the worker was drinking and smoking marijuana when he made a shocking revelation.
He told us that he knew about a location where there were a bunch of dead bodies that nobody knew about, not even the police, which I remember very clearly because he said this with such a terrible smirk on his face. We left after that and felt that he still knew something about John's disappearance that he wasn't telling us.
During the course of that time, this individual remained at Mowry's house and, in fact, tried to give away Mowry's dog, said he was glad John was gone, and then suddenly disappears himself.
The worker was one of several who had access to Gacy's home office. The worker told investigators he dug trenches in Gacy's crawl space. He said Gacy told him the trenches were for pipes. He claimed he knew nothing about bodies being buried there, but officials were always suspicious. How could he be so close to Gacy and not know? In this audio recording between Gacy in prison and a friend in Chicago, Gacy says many of his workers had keys to the house.
We already know that were involved in the case. David and all had keys to the house. In fact, they used the house when I wasn't in town. None of them got locked up. Nope, they're still free.
The friend who made the audio recordings has this picture of Gacy's home that Gacy painted in prison. He says the man peeking around the corner is the worker who helped dig the trenches that you can see depicted in the painting. A man who survived Gacy's attack, James Rignall, said another man was in Gacy's home when Gacy raped him. Rignall's description matches that of the worker. Gacy was arrested but never prosecuted, and then Gacy went on to murder 4 more young men. But prosecutor Terry Sullivan says they could never find strong evidence for the worker as an accomplice.
We did have suspicions that at least one was working with him. We couldn't get him to admit it, but he had gotten so far as to be down in Gacy's crawl space. We really couldn't crack him or prove by any scientific evidence that in fact he had anything to actually do with the actual killing.
That worker served time in prison for a crime unrelated to the Gacy case and is once again living in the Chicago area. We're not using his name in this story because he's never been charged in connection with the Gacy case. Attorney Stevenson has met with Sheriff Tom Dart and asked him to reopen an investigation of this case, and the Sheriff's Department says they will look into it. Robin?
Thanks, Larry.
The horrible truth to suburban contractor John Gacy's rambling statements to police last week is becoming more and more evident with each passing day. 6 more bodies unearthed from the basement crawl space of Gacy's Norwood Park Township home today, bringing to 15 the number found there since Friday. Des Plaines and Cook County Sheriff's Police investigators arrived first thing this morning to resume their search. The big white wagon, which has been used to transport bodies from the northwest suburb to the morgue, Fishbein Institute, pulled up early today and stood waiting outside the house while more digging went on inside. Also on the scene, crowds of onlookers, the curious, many of whom have stood the death watch for days. By late today, just about all the hollow spaces in the house had been opened up for the searchers, floorboards and ceiling panels pried loose and carted out to the huge bin just outside the front door. Most of the attention has been centered on the 30-inch dirt crawl space, similar to one we photographed in a house near Gacy's. This is where 12 of the 13 bodies were buried. Searchers are being hindered by water, which keeps filling in their holes, a water problem which Gacy had used as an excuse to have trenches dug in the crawl space. Employees who did the actual digging said they thought drainage tiles were to be buried, not bodies.
We did make the recovery 6 additional bodies, which brings our count up to 15 at this point in time. 3 of the bodies that have what we would consider strangulation cords or ligatures around their necks.
Now, all these bodies appear to be in the same state of decomposition.
That's something you'd have to ask the doctor. He's eminently qualified than I am.
I would say yes.
How long we've been in? About 15 minutes ago, the sight of familiar body bags being carried from that house today, 6 more in all, bringing the total to 15 found since Friday. Those officers not at the scene are gathering dental records and x-rays of teenage boys missing from the Chicago area since 1974. They're also combing payroll information from Gacy's contracting business and contacting former employees to make sure they're all alive. So far, all are. Adding to our report yesterday that other than the former employees, many victims may have been male prostitutes or homosexuals who came to Gacy's house willingly. Sources tell me today that Gacy used to cruise Bughouse Square, the homosexual pickup point between Clark and Dearborn on Chicago's near North Side, as well as several other Northwest Side bars. For that and other reasons, authorities believe most of the victims came from Chicago, where Harold Thomas, commander of the Police Department Youth Division, today defended the department's record in missing persons cases, telling our Vivian Rosenberg Chicago